I think development is changing enormously. Up until this post-2015 agenda began to be developed, the development people and the environment people were basically at different meetings talking about different things. I think the penny has well and truly dropped that if we are to have long-term solutions to poverty and inequality, then we have to have an environment which is capable of sustaining life. As it always has, with the services that our mountains, our glaciers, our forests, our oceans produce. And the way we've developed has put them under terrible pressure, right to the point of planetary boundaries in some cases. So now we need to be looking very holistically at how we grow, how we develop. We still want the best for people. We want people to have opportunity, education, healthcare, decent housing, proper infrastructure, all these things. But do it in a way that doesn't wreck the air, the water, the forests, the oceans, the vital ecosystems. Well, for me, the excitement is that countries who are starting to develop fast have an opportunity to do it in a way that is environmentally friendly. And when you see a least developed country like Ethiopia, which is very ambitious for its people, developing a strategy for being low carbon and climate resilient and having a green economy, you know that it is possible to think big, have a vision, look after your environment and lift your people's living standards. So it's those kind of strategies, those kind of sustainable development pathways that we want to encourage everyone to move along. Now, some people will need some help for sure. With the big emerging economies, they have deep pockets, they have sovereign wealth funds, they have a lot of means. The critical issue is to see that nobody's left behind. And in a continent like Latin America, a lot of people have been left behind in the fast growth and development. So those are issues specifically for this continent and for quite a lot of other countries. For least developed countries, if we're thinking Niger, for example, if we're thinking Mali, if we're thinking Somalia, their official development assistance from richer countries matters a lot because they have not yet been able to develop sufficient depth in their economy, often for other reasons. It may have been conflict, it may have been a series of big setbacks. And then being able to acquire the technologies you need at a price you can afford is also an issue for developing countries who want to be making these upfront investments in sustainability. Well, I think you focus on energy first and foremost, because if we have a universal energy access scenario, which is based on coal or oil, then it's a bit bleak. So ensuring that developing countries have the means to roll out energy in ways which really are sustainable with all the renewables technology now about, I think this is a critical sector. It's also about design of cities, the transport systems you put in. With the world population now standing at, 7.2, 7.3 billion and estimated to go over 9 billion, maybe 9.5 by 2050, most of the extra people in the world are going to be in cities. So the quality of governance in our cities, the way our cities are designed, do we want them just to be sprawling out with informal settlements, or do we have a vision for decent, livable communities for our cities with sustainable transport? These are big issues now. Well, what matters enormously in how resources are allocated is the political system. Is it a fair system? Does everybody have the right to participate and have a say? Can they influence the distribution of resources, or are resources dominated by elites? These are huge issues. So at UNDP we work a great deal in the governance space. We work to support civil society, ordinary citizens, to have a voice, to express, to advocate, to empower their organisations. We work on transparency, on anti-corruption initiatives, on access to justice so people can have their rights upheld, honesty in police forces, border authorities, these things matter. So if you can get that governance, accountability, responsiveness side right, that's quite helpful to taking the kinds of decisions which will make for more equitable and inclusive development. Well, I think Peru should be proud of the fact that this is the first time at a Conference of Parties on Climate Change that there's been a full Indigenous pavilion. Peru has been very welcoming of big participation, and with support from Norway, UNDP's been able to facilitate around 300 representatives of Indigenous peoples coming to this conference and having a voice. And that's following on from the Climate Summit in New York, where Indigenous peoples were also very vocal, particularly on the forests issue, big one for Peru and surrounding countries. And the World Conference on Indigenous People, which was held in New York as well. So we are very much in the business of enabling people who have been very marginalised in societies to have voice, to be able to articulate what their needs are, what they want, to help determine the sort of development path they want. And I think in the case of forests and climate change, you can now show fairly conclusively that where Indigenous people actually have their rights over forest recognised and are able to exercise their stewardship and custodianship, the rate of deforestation is a small fraction of what it is in other forests. So what is good for Indigenous people on forests will also be good for our world. We've also had specific initiatives which have enabled more women to participate at these climate change conferences and to have the knowledge and the awareness and the capacity to analyse and know what's going on and have input. Yes, women are disproportionately affected. If you take, for example, the woman farmer who earns less money than a male farmer on average around the world. Why is this? She has less secure rights to land or tenure. In many number of countries she can't inherit property, she can't open a bank account without the husband's permission. So she starts off on the back foot. She may not get the best seeds, and if you're in an area of the world which is prone to more drought, you need drought-resistant seeds, you don't need the old ones. You need access to information, and there's not equal access to information. You need access to credit. So the women can be left more exposed to the disasters and less able to adapt. And that's what we have to focus on. How do we even up the odds here so that women have the same chances of building the resilience to the dramatic events going on in our ecosystems? What I would look at, for example, with the forest country is, can it meet the targets set in the New York Declaration of Forests, which was launched in September? And that declaration commits everyone who signed it to halving the rate of deforestation by 2020, which is only 6 years away, and eliminating net deforestation by 2030. So that's ambitious. So if I were a forest country, I'd be saying, how am I going to meet that? And be prepared to be measured and evaluated against that. I would also be looking at issues like energy systems. When I was Prime Minister of my country, we set an ambition to be carbon neutral as a country. And specifically, we set carbon neutrality targets for energy, for transport, and for the waste sector. We said we can be totally renewable, carbon neutral in our energy by 2030. We can be carbon neutral in our transport system by 2030. I do think we need to be looking completely at the post-fossil fuel era in transport, no question. And that, again, is something that countries can take on board, have a strategy and start to work on how to get hold of the technologies to make it possible. Well, there's been a campaign here for zero emissions, zero poverty within a generation. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is telling us that we have to get rid of net emissions, right? So, and we ideally would do that by 2050, which is a little more than a generation. If we could do it by 2050, that would be a wonderful success. Well, an issue that always seems to me to be a little neglected, because we have got a lot of focus on forests now, and that's critical. You can't reach the the targets for climate without the forests being saved. There's a lot of attention on the position of the small island developing states, and that's very important. I sometimes think that the dry lands don't get enough attention, and the dry lands can be very exhausted with their soil, very exposed to erosion, very, very difficult for the poor farmers. So I think perhaps more of a focus on these issues of desertification and the conservation of the dry lands and the cover you need on them to ensure that they are storing carbon too is very important.